I discovered my husband embezzled $7 million from our own company. And he arranged everything so it looked like I was the one who stole it. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Delaney Whitaker. For 12 years, I believed I was living the kind of life people admire from the outside. I built a financial consulting firm from scratch with my husband, Corbin Hale. We didn't inherit wealth. We worked for it. Long nights in a tiny rented office. Coffee-stained spreadsheets. Clients who didn't trust us at first. Slowly, we grew. Corbin was charming. He could walk into a room full of investors and make them feel like old friends. I handled the numbers, the compliance, the details. We balanced each other. That's what I told myself whenever we argued about small things. The morning everything changed felt normal at first. I was reviewing quarterly compliance reports when our receptionist knocked and said 2 federal auditors were here to see me. I thought it was routine. We dealt with audits all the time. Transparency was part of our reputation. But when they sat across from me, their expressions were not routine. One of them slid a folder across my desk. Inside were printed transaction logs, highlighted amounts, transfer confirmations, large transfers, repeated transfers, $7 million over 4 years. Each one authorized under my executive credentials. At first, I honestly thought it was a mistake. Maybe duplicate reporting. Maybe internal system overlap. I tried to stay calm as I explained how our security worked, how every transaction required layered approval. Then they showed me something that made my hands go cold. Digital authorization stamps. My name. My login. My encrypted signature. Every single time. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I knew I hadn't approved those transfers. I would remember moving millions of dollars. That wasn't something you forget. The auditors said they were opening a formal investigation. They told me not to discuss it with staff. They asked for full access to internal records. After they left, I just sat there staring at my computer screen. $7 million missing. My credentials attached to every dollar. Corbin walked into my office later that afternoon, smiling, asking how my morning was. I looked at him, and for a brief second, I wanted to believe it was all some technical error we would fix together. But something inside me felt off. Because whoever did this didn't just steal money. They built a trail. And that trail led straight to me. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the next morning. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying every possibility in my head, trying to figure out how my credentials could have been used without me knowing. I had always been careful. Passwords updated regularly. 2-factor authentication. Encrypted backups. That was my department. My responsibility. When I walked into the conference room, the atmosphere felt different. Too quiet. Thatcher Boone, our CFO, sat stiffly at the far end of the table. Elise Marlowe from legal avoided eye contact. Grant Hollis had a thick folder in front of him. Corbin sat beside me, close enough that our arms almost touched. He gave me a small squeeze on the hand under the table, like he was comforting me. Thatcher began speaking in a controlled voice. They had reviewed the flagged transactions. The total missing amount had reached $7 million over 4 years. The transfers were structured carefully, never large enough at once to cause alarm, always routed through approved vendor channels. Then Grant turned the folder toward me. Printed logs. Authorization codes. Timestamps. My credentials. My clearance level. My executive approval. The room wasn't loud. No one shouted accusations. That almost made it worse. They were calm. Professional. Careful with their words. Elise said they were concerned. Thatcher said the situation looked serious. Grant said they needed clarity. Every sentence felt like a polite way of saying, "This looks like you did it." I tried to explain that the system must have been compromised. That maybe someone cloned my access token. That maybe there was an internal breach. My voice sounded distant, even to me. Corbin spoke up then. He told them I was the most ethical person he knew. That I would never risk our firm like this. He suggested we hire an outside cybersecurity firm to investigate. Everyone nodded slowly. But something about his tone bothered me. It was almost too smooth. Too prepared. After the meeting, people avoided looking directly at me. Assistants whispered. Conversations stopped when I walked by. News hadn't spread publicly yet, but inside the firm, tension traveled fast. That afternoon, our corporate accounts were partially frozen pending review. It was standard procedure, they said. Just precautionary. Precautionary. At home that evening, Corbin poured me a glass of wine and told me everything would be fine. He said audits sometimes misread internal routing. He blamed our outdated internal server structure, the same upgrade he'd postponed twice because it was too expensive right now. He kept reassuring me, but reassurance felt different when you were the one under suspicion. Later that night, I opened my laptop and reviewed the transaction timestamps again. Something caught my attention. Several of the largest transfers were authorized while I was out of state at compliance conferences. I distinctly remembered those trips. Packed auditoriums, panel discussions, hotel Wi-Fi that barely worked. Yet according to the logs, I had approved multi-million-dollar transfers during those exact hours. That wasn't just strange. That was deliberate. The next few days felt like I was walking through a building that was slowly collapsing, but no one wanted to admit it. The auditors worked quietly in a private office. Staff members avoided casual conversations. Even small talk in the hallway disappeared. I tried to act normal. I answered emails, reviewed reports, sat in meetings. But I could feel it, eyes lingering a second too long, doubt hanging in the air. By the end of the week, the board called another closed-door session. This time the tone was firmer. Thatcher explained that forensic accountants had traced the missing funds through layered vendor payments. The money wasn't simply withdrawn. It had been moved carefully through approved channels, disguised as consulting expenses and project retainers. Every approval still carried my digital signature. Elise spoke next. She said that legally, intent mattered. If someone had accessed my credentials without authorization, we needed proof. Without that proof, liability would fall on the credential holder. That was me. Grant asked if I had shared my login with anyone. I said no. That was against policy. He asked if my password had ever been written down or stored unsecured. I said absolutely not. Corbin spoke up again, defending me. He said I was meticulous, almost obsessive, about compliance. He even laughed softly and said I annoyed him with security reminders. Everyone smiled politely. But I noticed something I hadn't before. Corbin never once sounded surprised. He never said, "How could this happen?" or "Who would do this?" He only focused on damage control. After the meeting, Thatcher pulled me aside. His voice dropped lower. He said that if investigators concluded internal fraud, the firm would have to cooperate fully, even if it meant criminal referral. Criminal referral. The words echoed in my head. That night at home, I felt something shift inside me. Fear turned into something sharper, clarity. I opened our shared financial archives and began reviewing old vendor files from years back. I wasn't looking randomly. I focused on transfers tied to one name that kept appearing, Redmere Holdings LLC. It was listed as a strategic advisory partner. The payments were steady but irregular. Large enough to matter. Small enough not to raise alarms. I searched corporate registration databases. Redmere had been formed 4 years ago. Around the same time the first questionable transfer appeared. The registered trustee name made my pulse spike. Gannon Price. I knew that name. Gannon was Corbin's college roommate. They had been best friends for years before drifting apart. Or at least that's what I had been told. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. If Redmere was connected to Gannon, and Gannon was connected to Corbin, then this wasn't random fraud. It was personal. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that terrified me more than the missing money. What if the person setting me up was sleeping in the same bed as me? That night I didn't confront Corbin. I didn't ask questions. I didn't let him see anything change in my face. If my growing suspicion was wrong, I didn't want to destroy our marriage over paranoia. But if it was right, I needed proof before he realized I was looking. The next morning, I told him I had an early compliance call and locked myself in my home office. Instead of joining any meeting, I accessed our archived server backups. Years ago, I had insisted we maintain offline encrypted backups stored separately from the main system. Corbin had complained it was excessive. Now I was grateful I hadn't listened to him. The backups showed raw system logs, logs that weren't polished or filtered for reports. I searched for remote access entries tied to my credentials. It didn't take long to notice something strange. Several login sessions originated from an IP address that didn't match my known devices. They occurred late at night, often between 1 o'clock and 3 a.m. On many of those nights, I had been asleep upstairs. I checked another detail, device fingerprinting. The system recorded browser and hardware markers. The unfamiliar sessions shared one consistent device ID. I cross-referenced it with internal admin records. The device ID matched a secondary executive laptop issued 2 years ago, assigned to Corbin Hale. My hand started shaking, but I kept digging. I opened Redmere Holdings' payment history and traced the first transaction. The invoice referenced Strategic Compliance Consulting. That was my department. The approval log showed my credentials, but the IP origin for that authorization came from the same device ID tied to Corbin's laptop. He hadn't just used my password. He had accessed my credentials through the internal system while logged in from his machine. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying to steady my breathing. I thought about all the times he stayed up working late. All the times he insisted on reviewing system upgrades personally. All the delays in upgrading security protocols he claimed were unnecessary expenses. He didn't want stronger security. He needed the vulnerability. But I still needed to understand one thing. Why frame me? Why not just siphon the money quietly? Then I remembered something he said 3 months earlier during an argument. We had disagreed about restructuring ownership shares. I wanted more transparency with the board. He wanted executive control consolidated. He said, half joking, "If this company ever collapses, compliance will take the blame first." At the time, I thought it was frustration talking. Now it sounded like strategy. I opened the Cayman Islands subsidiary records and found something worse. A holding account linked indirectly to Redmere had received structured transfers that mirrored the missing amounts. The authorized signatory on that offshore account? Corbin Hale. The room felt smaller. The walls closer. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, planned over years, calculated step by step. And I finally understood something chilling. He didn't just steal $7 million. He built a story where I was the villain. Once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. I spent the entire weekend gathering copies of everything from the offline backups. I saved raw logs, IP traces, vendor registrations, device IDs, timestamp comparisons. Anything that connected Corbin's laptop to transactions made under my credentials. I didn't touch the main system. I didn't want him alerted by unusual activity reports. On Sunday evening, Corbin suggested we take a short trip after all this audit stress settled. He talked about beaches, fresh starts, maybe even selling part of the firm once things stabilized. He sounded almost excited. That's when it hit me. He wasn't worried. If he truly believed I was being framed by someone else, he would be panicking, angry, demanding answers. Instead, he was calm, like someone waiting for a storm to pass because he already knew how it would end. Late that night, while he was downstairs on a call, I checked our personal financial disclosures. As co-founders, we had to file detailed asset transparency reports yearly. I opened the most recent draft Corbin had prepared for submission. There was a section marked, pending marital restructuring. My chest tightened. It referenced a preliminary consultation with a private family attorney regarding asset protection in the event of legal liability arising from executive misconduct. Executive misconduct. The language was vague, but the intent wasn't. He was preparing for divorce. And not just divorce. Divorce timed around a financial scandal that would implicate me. If charges were filed under my name, if I became legally responsible for embezzlement, the company would likely remove me. My ownership shares could be frozen. Our joint assets could be shielded if structured correctly beforehand. He was building a clean exit. $7 million offshore. Wife takes the fall. File for divorce. Walk away with reputation mostly intact. The more I mapped it out, the more horrifyingly logical it became. He had spent 4 years slowly transferring money. He had carefully used my compliance authority to make the fraud believable. He had planted small comments with partners about my stress levels. He had laid emotional groundwork in case anyone questioned my stability. He wasn't impulsive. He was patient. On Monday, the board informed us that law enforcement might be contacted if internal findings confirmed fraud. Corbin squeezed my shoulder again and said, "We'll get through this." I looked at him differently this time. Not as my husband, not as my partner, but as someone who had quietly positioned me as the scapegoat. I realized something else too. If I confronted him without solid external protection, he could accelerate the plan. Destroy evidence. Shift funds again. Claim I was unraveling under pressure. So I made a decision. I would not argue. I would not accuse. I would let him believe his story was working. And then I would choose the moment to end it. The more I watched him, the clearer everything became. Corbin had started behaving differently in small but telling ways. He began taking more private calls outside. He locked his study door at night, something he never used to do. He started speaking to the board more frequently without including me. When I asked about certain meetings, he would say, "I didn't want to stress you out." He was isolating me professionally. At the office, I overheard Thatcher mention to someone that I had seemed overwhelmed lately. That word again. Overwhelmed. Stressed. Erratic. Subtle character damage. Nothing direct. Just enough to plant doubt. I went back through internal email threads from the past year. I noticed a pattern. Corbin had occasionally replied all to group emails correcting minor details I had already handled. Harmless on the surface. But over time, it built an image that I was missing things and he was stepping in to stabilize operations. He was rewriting perception. Then I found something that made everything painfully clear. In one archived board memo draft, never officially sent but saved in his executive folder, Corbin had outlined a contingency leadership transition plan in the event of reputational harm tied to compliance leadership. Compliance leadership. That was me. The draft proposed that he temporarily assume expanded authority to reassure investors while internal investigations proceeded. It framed the move as protective, not punitive. He had prepared for my removal. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was strategic displacement. I sat in my car outside the office one afternoon, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. 12 years of marriage. Shared birthdays. Shared losses. Shared dreams. And somewhere along the way, he had decided I was expendable. The emotional betrayal hurt more than the money. But pain wasn't useful right now. Precision was. I organized my evidence carefully. Timeline comparisons showing I was physically out of state during key transfers. IP logs tied to his device. Offshore account documents listing him as signatory. Corporate formation records linking Redmere to Gannon Price. Then I reached out quietly to an old law school acquaintance, someone I trusted completely, Rowan Kessler. I didn't give full details at first. I just asked one question. If someone inside a company used another executive's credentials to commit fraud, and that person has proof, what's the safest way to report it? Rowan didn't hesitate. Federal authorities. Directly. Before internal politics bury it. That night I lay awake next to Corbin, listening to his steady breathing. I realized he believed I was trapped. That I would panic. That I would try to defend myself internally until the narrative closed around me. He thought I was reacting. He didn't realize I had already shifted into action. I wasn't going to argue with him in private. I was going to expose him where he felt safest. Publicly. The annual investor gala was 3 weeks away. It was the biggest night of the year for our firm. Major clients flew in. Local business leaders attended. Industry reporters usually covered the event. Corbin loved it. He thrived in rooms filled with attention. This year, he was especially focused on it. He told the board he would announce a bold expansion plan to restore confidence after the audit concerns. He framed it as strength during uncertainty. I saw it differently. He was preparing to control the narrative before investigators could shape it. A week before the gala, I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division through a secure referral Rowan arranged. I didn't dramatize anything. I presented facts. I explained the internal investigation. I shared the device logs, the offshore links, the formation documents connecting Redmere Holdings to Gannon Price and, indirectly, to Corbin. The agent assigned to the case asked careful questions. Calm questions. He requested copies of raw data, not summaries. I provided everything exactly as stored in the offline backups. At the end of the meeting, he asked me one direct question. If this proceeds, it may become public quickly. Are you prepared for that? I didn't answer immediately. Public exposure meant headlines. Scrutiny. Temporary suspicion still hanging over me. It meant my private humiliation becoming professional spectacle. But staying silent meant letting Corbin finish the story he started. Yes, I said finally. I'm prepared. The week of the gala arrived. Corbin seemed relaxed. Confident. He had no idea I had already stepped outside the company structure. He believed the investigation still centered on me. He believed time was on his side. The ballroom that night glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished glass. 200 guests filled the space. Investors laughed over champagne. Staff members wore practiced smiles. I wore a navy gown and stood beside my husband as cameras flashed. From the outside, we looked united. Inside, I felt steady. Earlier that afternoon, I had confirmed details with the FBI team. They would not disrupt the event recklessly. They would wait for the right moment, once his public remarks began. Corbin stepped onto the stage to applause. He adjusted the microphone and started speaking about resilience, growth, and leadership through adversity. His voice was smooth, confident, controlled. As he spoke, I noticed movement near the entrance. 2 men and a woman in formal attire stepped inside, scanning the room calmly. No panic. No urgency. Just quiet authority. Corbin was mid-sentence when the lead agent approached the stage steps. The room slowly fell silent. Corbin looked confused at first, then annoyed. The agent showed his badge and spoke his name clearly. And in that moment, everything shifted. The room went completely silent. At first, some guests thought it was part of the program. A dramatic announcement, maybe. But when the agent stepped fully onto the stage and spoke again, firm, steady, unmistakable, everyone understood this was real. He identified himself and informed Corbin that there was a federal warrant related to financial crimes involving wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity-based manipulation of executive credentials. You could hear glasses being set down on tables. Corbin's confident posture cracked. He gave a short laugh, like this had to be some misunderstanding. He glanced toward me briefly, probably expecting panic on my face. But I wasn't panicking. I was watching. The agent continued speaking clearly, outlining that funds had been traced through shell vendors, including Redmere Holdings, and into offshore accounts where Corbin was listed as authorized signatory. When the name Redmere was said out loud, the color drained from his face. He tried to speak, but the words came out uneven. He said there must be confusion. He said there was an ongoing internal review. He gestured lightly toward me as if to suggest I could explain. But I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. The agents didn't argue with him. They simply informed him he would need to come with them. Calmly. Professionally. In front of the same investors he had just tried to impress. No shouting. No dramatic struggle. Just the quiet click of handcuffs closing around his wrists. A ripple of whispers spread across the ballroom. Some people looked at me with shock. Others with sympathy. A few with suspicion. They still didn't know the full story yet. Corbin looked at me one last time as they guided him down from the stage. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It was disbelief. He truly hadn't thought I would figure it out. Or if I did, he thought I would break down privately. Confront him at home. Beg for answers. He never imagined I would gather evidence. He never imagined I would go outside the firm. He never imagined I would choose that night. As the doors closed behind him and the agents escorted him out, the ballroom remained frozen. The board members looked stunned. Thatcher slowly stood, unsure what to say. I stepped forward instead. My voice was steady, even though my heart was racing. I believe the authorities have uncovered the source of the discrepancies, I said. The firm will cooperate fully. That was all. No accusations. No speeches. Just clarity. The gala ended early. Guests left quietly. Reporters began making calls. And for the first time since the audit began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief, but control. The days after the arrest were harder than I expected. Even though Corbin had been taken into custody, the investigation didn't instantly clear my name. Federal cases move carefully. Evidence has to be verified independently. Every log, every transfer, every digital trace had to be reviewed by forensic analysts. In the meantime, the headlines started. Finance executive arrested at Gala. $7 million fraud scheme. My name still appeared in early reports as initially under internal review. That part stung. I knew the truth, but public clarity takes time. The board placed me on temporary administrative leave, not as punishment, they said, but to protect the firm during the ongoing case. I understood the decision logically. Emotionally, it still hurt. This was the company I helped build. Federal investigators interviewed me for hours over several sessions. They asked about my marriage, about company structure, about internal controls, about my knowledge of Redmere Holdings and Gannon Price. I answered everything directly. I provided additional archived data they requested. I showed them travel records proving I was physically out of state during major transfers. I handed over email threads and system logs showing remote access from Corbin's device. The turning point came when forensic analysis confirmed that my credentials had been accessed from his assigned laptop multiple times during late-night sessions. The IP logs matched. The device fingerprint matched. The timestamps aligned with transfer authorizations. That was the break. Once investigators traced the offshore holding accounts and confirmed Corbin as authorized signatory, the narrative shifted publicly. New headlines followed. Co-founder cleared as evidence points to husband. Executive allegedly framed spouse in $7 million fraud. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. My marriage was over. My personal life was dissected by strangers. But the truth was finally visible. Through discovery documents, prosecutors uncovered something even colder than I expected. Corbin had consulted privately with a divorce attorney months before the audit began. Draft agreements showed he intended to file for divorce shortly after the internal investigation formally implicated me. The plan was clear in black and white. If I had been charged first, I would have faced criminal liability, reputational destruction, and possibly prison. He would have positioned himself as the betrayed business partner and wronged husband. Instead, the charges were filed against him: wire fraud, financial identity misuse, conspiracy involving shell corporations, and embezzlement totaling $7 million. Asset seizures followed. Offshore accounts were frozen. Redmere Holdings was exposed as a shell. I filed for divorce the same week the indictment was unsealed. There were no dramatic courtroom confrontations between us. No screaming. Just paperwork. Depositions. Financial disclosures. When I saw him across the courtroom during a preliminary hearing, he didn't look angry anymore. He looked smaller. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel fear when I looked back. After the indictment became public and federal filings clearly outlined how my credentials had been misused, the board asked me to return. This time, not as co-founder beside Corbin, but as sole managing partner. Walking back into the office felt different. Some employees looked relieved. Others embarrassed for ever doubting me. I didn't blame them. The evidence had pointed at me at first. That was the design. I held a staff meeting my first week back. I didn't speak about betrayal. I didn't speak about revenge. I spoke about accountability, stronger security systems, and transparency moving forward. I announced immediate upgrades to internal authorization protocols. No single executive credential would ever have that level of isolated control again. Trust would now be structural, not emotional. Clients began returning once the facts settled. Investors appreciated the clarity. The firm had taken a hit, but it survived. The divorce finalized months later. There was no dramatic last conversation. No apology that would ever be enough. Corbin eventually accepted a plea deal to reduce his sentence. The recommended term was substantial. His professional licenses were permanently revoked. $7 million had nearly destroyed everything. But silence would have destroyed more. People sometimes ask me if exposing him publicly was about revenge. I've thought about that question carefully. Revenge implies anger driving the decision. What I felt that night at the Gala wasn't anger. It was survival. If I had confronted him privately, he would have denied it. If I had tried to solve it quietly within the firm, politics might have buried the truth. If I had panicked, I might have made mistakes that strengthened his narrative. Instead, I documented everything. I stayed calm. I chose the moment carefully. The real revenge wasn't watching him get arrested. It was refusing to carry a crime that wasn't mine. It was rebuilding the company he tried to take from me. It was proving that calculated deception collapses under evidence. I still think about the early days sometimes. The small rented office, the late nights, the dreams we once shared. That version of him feels like a different person now. Maybe ambition changed him. Maybe greed did. Or maybe I just never saw the warning signs. What I know for certain is this: trust without verification is vulnerability. Love without transparency can be dangerous. And when someone quietly writes a story where you're meant to be the villain, you don't argue with them. You gather proof. And you let the truth speak where everyone can hear it.